howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, what I wanted to do was showcase the loot that I got from doing about 140,000 Sulphite worth of delving in the Delve mines, but a bit deeper than the last video. So the previous video, I did an average depth of 280. This video, I'm doing an average depth of 370. Give you a bit of a comparison, what to expect. So firstly, from a difficulty perspective, at 280 depth, monsters deal 22% increased damage. So they're basically tier 16 monsters, but with a bonus of 22% damage and a bonus of 11% life. Now when you jump that up to 370, that damage increase jumps up to a massive 67%. So that means that essentially, it's like you've only got 3/5 as much effective health as you'd otherwise have. So if you have 5,000 life on your character normally, that'll allow you to take 5,000 hit points worth of damage in monster level 83 zones like maps, but only 3,000 at this depth in the mines. So that's a pretty significant factor, and it changes the way you play. You can either go much tankier, or you can go more all-in on damage. At this point, monster health hasn't scaled up enough for you to really need to focus that hard on damage, and my approach is just try not to get hit. But as it is, even though I don't have very much health on this character, I do have enough to survive. But anyways, we're talking about loot, not strategy. So in terms of the loot, you'll notice just with a quick glance at this tab that there are a lot of maps. First thing I want to do though is go through divination cards and the... that's not a divination card. Divination cards and the fossils. So divination cards were basically really derisory. One humility, couple of chaos, one void, couple of chaos, one dapper prodigy, couple of chaos. Really nothing there. There are a few other ones here, but they are all trash tier divination cards. From a fossil perspective, you might notice that I've got less here than I had in the depth 280 video. There's two reasons for that. The first one is that because the content is harder and therefore less forgiving, it's less possible to go off into side passages and explore. Tankier builds than mine certainly can do it, and those builds would be rewarded for doing so with more fossils than I have here. However, when the map mods in an area were nasty, I felt compelled to just get through the zone. That wasn't happening at all at depth 280. At depth 370, there were several zones where I was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to run straight through this one because there's, monsters penetrating 12% elemental resistance and monsters dealing two different types of damage as extra of an element. And suddenly the amount of incoming damage is so high that a single critical hit from a trash mob will kill me. Two taps from any monsters will kill me, and some of the bosses can one-shot you as well. So there's less fossils than there were. But just going through, 17 metallic, 11 bound. 11 bound is good. The time I recorded the last video, bound fossils were higher than they are now. This is only about 55 or 60 chaos at the moment. It was a lot more the time I did the last video. 3 etheric, 8 scorched, 6 aberrant, 2 shuddering, 5 dense, 4 pristine, 2 serrated, which is always a very nice fossil at the moment, 1 enchanted, 13 frigid, which is nice. These have gone up since the last video. Only 2 perfect, which is really small. I just think by chance I didn't have many of their biome. 2 corroded, 9 jagged, and only 1 sanctified. But sanctifieds are pretty rare and they're pretty good. You'll notice that I have absolutely none of the premium ultra rare fossils. That's the tangled at the garbage end through to bloodstained, faceted, and fractured at the upper end, and also including glyphic and hollow. That's just RNG. And so I got 2 of them in the last video, 0 this time. I would expect that you would get more 0.5 at the lower depth on average, and 1, maybe 1.5 at this depth for 140,000 Sulphite. However, your mileage may vary, and this is going to be utterly dominated by variance. I'm going to pause the video now, and then we'll come back and do the maps. Okay, and next up we have maps, and by God did we get a lot of these. A lot. 30, count them, 30 tier 16 maps in this, only from 140,000 Sulphite. You'll notice that that is a huge upgrade on the amount of maps that we got and the depth, and the lower depth, the 280 depth one. 7 tier 15s, which is a little bonus, and 6 tier 14s. There is a 7th one, this Lava Lake here, but it dropped as an unID'd corrupted map, which has considerably lower value. So I'm just flat out not going to count that. I'm going to treat it as though it doesn't exist at all, except for the point of mentioning that it is there. In terms of other maps, there's this unique, and then there's just a bunch of tier 13 and down maps. Now, 13 and down maps have their place early in a league, but as late as we are in the Blight League, these are just simply not going to hold any value at all. This has been a very high map returns league, which means that consequence of having so many maps entering the economy is that they're just not worth very much. And if you want further evidence of just how many maps the Delve Mines drop, have a look at the map tab that I've got here. You'll see 20 Forges of the Phoenix, 24 Les the Hydra, 17 Maze of the Minotaur, 28 Pit of the Chimera. These Vile Temples, I did buy a lot of Vile Temples, although I have sold as many tier 16 maps now as I've bought, and 18 Elder Beaches. I'm running a 159 or 159 Atlas, which does mean that I can get more map drops than, more tier 16 drops than someone that's running a Shaped Atlas, but still 113 gives you a sense of just how much of an oversupply of maps there is in this league, and the Delve Mines are the reason for that. Okay, so this next is every pile of currency that has significant value. So you'll see 12 Master Sextors, that's about 35 Chaos, 6 Journeymen, that's another 12, so we're looking at about 47. Divine Orb, we're at 75. 55 Raw Chaos, we're now at 130. Bunch of Chromatics, not much, not enough to count. 10 Scourings, so we're now at 170. 30 Fusings, that's 170. That's about another 10. That's 180. Some Regrets, 190. Some Elks, 200. Some Silver Coins, 205. Some Chisels, that's enough to put us to 240. Some Vials, 260. A single Harbinger Orb, and some Horizon Orbs, that'll put us to about 280. With the Apprentice Sextons counted as well. And then a bunch of crumbs as well. 290 all told in raw currency. Don't count those Ancient Shards. They didn't drop here. They shouldn't be in this slot. So 280 in pure currency drops. There are also some little trash ones there that I'll count up separately, but I think they'll be virtually nothing except for the essences. We have a number of essences that dropped, and I'm inclined to consider these almost valueless in the current economy. Reason being that so many of them are dropping. Of note, though, we do have a Deafening Essence of Contempt, and Deafenings that dropped as it is. It hasn't been upgraded. That dropped from one of the contains physical items nodes that I'll discuss in a little bit. Not particularly much value in these, just because essences are just so cheap this league, but still some interesting stuff that drops. In terms of the last commodities that we got that are actually easy to dispose of, we had 14 Sacrifice Fragments. This really does not feel like many. Normally, in my experience, I think you get quite a few more than that, but ultimately, variance is going to dominate on a sample size that's this small. And even one that was 10 times this size, variance is still going to be a big player. So all of these are basically a chaos or so each. Then there's some interesting rare items that dropped. Because of the Eldritch and Astral nodes, you can get Shaper and Elder jewelry in these areas. These have a little bit of value, mostly actually to players that are completing the Exalt Shard recipe, although they can also have some crafting value as well. These aren't the best bases. Rustic Sash is a pretty solid base, but the Amethyst Ring is a pretty poor base, and so for that reason, most players tend to want to craft on item level 85 and 86 ones as well, so I don't think they'll sell for their intrinsic value. Then I got something that was a real blast from the past, and when I mouse over this, if you've played Path of Exile for about 5 years, you'll recognise an item that looks like it was a 5 Exalt item from 5 years ago. It's certainly not worth that now. But have a look at this Storm Snare leather belt for a bit of a blast from the past. This is an all-defensive belt that would have been amazing at one stage in the game. It dropped from one of the Twisted Jewelry nodes that drops jewelry that has already been corrupted. So I haven't valed this. This dropped pre-corrupted. And you'll notice that it's a 6 mod rare with considerable amount of life on it. Armor, which is not something people want on belts anymore, but we go back to sort of the Sacrifice of the Vaal era of the game, was a sought after mod, and 2 quite high tier resists. I feel that if this had dropped for me during the period of Sacrifice of the Vaal, this would have been a 3, 4, 5 Exalt item. It would have been the best drop I'd had all league. Nowadays, however, it really doesn't have any value of note at all. This is the sort of thing I'd throw in a 50 Chaos tab if it was early in the league, but this late in the league, it's a lot less. Also, in terms of items that are reasonably good but not extraordinarily valuable, is a good old Star Conjures. It's a very good starter helm. The last thing that I got is a whole bunch of pre-identified rares. And these drop from the nodes that contain things like physical items or contain minion and aura items. And they have a couple of really unique mods on them. So if we have a look at this mod, you'll see the suffix modifier of the underground is the 3rd mod on the item. Lots of hybrid mods on this item, so it can be a bit hard to parse. But attacks have 25% chance to cause bleeding and 38% increased damage with bleeding. That is a really conditional but really strong mod. Unfortunately, the Plague Paw Carnal Mitts are terrible. They're basically not something that anyone's likely to want to use. And that's the drawback to those Delve exclusive mods. You cannot get that by rolling it with fossils. You can only get these items dropping, kind of like the Incursion Temple drops. They just drop as they are. There's a whole bunch of these that dropped. I'm not going to assign any value to these, but they're just some interesting things to have a look through. Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you as an explicit mod on a set of gloves. I think a lot of us are familiar with that as a very powerful corruption on jewels, but it is also available on gloves as well. The other interesting item that I got that I don't think is good enough because it's on a 1.4 attack speed weapon and on a mace, but this mace here has tier 1 weapon elemental damage combined with the subterranean increased cold damage mod for basically giving both effects at once. Unfortunately, the overall package of the item isn't very good, and it's not such an extraordinary item that it feels like it's worthwhile beast crafting it. However, it still is an interesting drop that came out of one of those nodes. Sort of thing that if you're playing solo self-found could be really interesting. Some of the other mods that you can pick up are plus 3% to maximum single resist, cold damage leached as life or similar for other elements on amulets, but the rings are the better ones. Curse enemies with level 5 frostbite on hit. Curse enemies with frostbite on hit. And there's a few others like it as well. If I have a look around for those rings, you'll see that there's also this Amethyst string has minion steal 25 to 35% increased damage. There's a bunch of mods like that. 34% increased damage on minions. Curse enemies with level 5 conductivity on hit. Those are potentially very, very, very nice, and whilst I'm not going to assert a value for them, they're the sort of thing that my usual approach is to set a price on the whole tab. So I'll just say, alright, let's start being greedy and price everything at 75 chaos to start with. And then most of it won't sell, of course, because most of it is rubbish, even at that price. But some of it will, or some of it might. And if nothing sells, I'll then just drop the price by 30%, then by 30% again, and so on until stuff starts moving out of it. Eventually, you get to the point where you give up and you vendor the rest. So at this point, it comes time to sum up everything, and only counting highly liquid commodities, so I'm not counting things like rare items that I'm not sure will ever sell. Only counting the things that are highly liquid, we have about 330 chaos in fossils, only 10 in divination cards, about 450 chaos in tier 16 maps, about 63 chaos in tier 15s, about 30 chaos in tier 14s, about 50 chaos in lower tier maps, about 280 chaos in raw currency, 30 in essences, and about 14 in fragments and other miscellaneous crap. So all told, we're looking at about 1150 chaos total there, only counting things that I'm pretty confident would be very easy to sell. There's potential to get more, but that would be trading profit rather than being actual delve income. I'm pretty happy with that as something that comes along while you're doing fun content and getting a lot of XP, or at least I would be getting a lot of XP, except I keep on dying. In terms of delve bosses, I do have a couple of delve bosses, but this character is very poorly set up for fighting them. So I have if we have a look at my delve mines, I have a Grand Architect's Temple for Ahalati the Blind. I have a Kurgle down here, and I have another Ahu fighting somewhere around here. There you are, Ahu. So there's 3 delve bosses. None of them actually have nasty mods at all, which is really pleasant. I haven't found an all yet, but they're all here. They're just all a bit further down in the mines. Anyways, gonna leave it there. If you've got any questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I hope you have a good one.